I played every Star Wars Battlefront game. Here's my thoughts. Star Wars Battlefront is a legendary series of games, starting all the way back in 2004 with the original Star Wars Battlefront. These games are all, in some capacity, team-based shooters with ground objectives and vehicles, all set in the Star Wars universe. All of them are big, conquest-driven shooters set on sprawling Star Wars worlds. This video will be the first part of a broad overview of all of the games. Really quickly though, I do just want to thank my patrons, including Brandon Wolf, Meg Han Solo Coop, and That's Just Ash in the Played Every Game tier, and Melancholis in the Omega Gamer tier, along with the rest of these wonderful people. It means the world to me. Alright, let's get into the games. Star Wars Battlefront was released in 2004 for PC and home consoles. This game is an objective-based shooter game where you can choose between two time periods, the Clone Wars and the Galactic Civil War. Basically, the prequels are the original trilogy. Now, for context here, this game came out smack in the middle of the Star Wars prequel hype. In 2004, it had been 2 years since Episode 2 Attack of the Clones, and it was only a year before Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith was slated to hit theaters. So to explain how this game works, I'll use the Instant Action mode as an example. In Instant Action, the first thing that you do is select the maps that you want to play. Once you choose a map, you then choose which era you want to play on that map. Some maps, like Hoth, only have one era, for consistency reasons I'm assuming. Once you've selected your maps and eras, you can then start the game on the first map that you selected. Once you're in, you can choose a side. In the Clone Wars, it's the Republic or the CIS. In the Galactic Civil War, it's the Rebels or the Empire. Also, before I forget, you can play in either first or third person modes, but I prefer third person at least in the first game. Anyways, from there, you can choose one of the troops that your faction has available. Most factions have a standard soldier with a blaster rifle, they have a sniper, a heavy weapons soldier, and a pilot who can repair vehicles. In every faction though, there's usually a special unit with a different kind of kit from the others though. For the clones, for example, there's a jet trooper who has an EMP launcher and a jetpack. The CIS have droidicas who can roll around and shield, just like in the movies. Every unit also has multiple weapons and equipment. Usually the secondary weapon will be a blaster pistol that doesn't use ammo, but instead a heat mechanic that requires it to cool down. There's also a bunch of vehicles that you can choose from, including AT-ATs, AT-STs, land speeders, and even Tauntauns. On top of vehicles, there's also mounted weapons that you can use to take out infantry and sometimes other vehicles. Once you're in a battle and you've chosen your unit, you then choose which command post you want to spawn in. You can only spawn in command posts that your team holds, which are green in this game. The goal is to then either capture the command posts around your map for your team, or to deplete the enemy's reinforcements entirely, which you can see at the top of the screen. It works kind of on a ticket system, sort of like Battlefield. If the enemy still has reinforcements but your team captures all of the command posts, there's a countdown timer to your victory, and unless the enemy can recapture one, it's a guaranteed win. Other things to note: as you run around capturing points on these maps, there are droids on the points that will heal you and resupply you if you hang around them. Additionally, downed units will usually drop a healing or ammo item. I think the gameplay loop in this game, and by extension the next game, is excellent. There's something about finding a groove and just mowing down enemy units and capturing command posts, sometimes going in solo. So visually, this game, for when it came out, actually looks pretty great. There's a really iconic look to the old Battlefront games, and this game really nails it. The world looks and feels like Star Wars, though some of the maps are a bit basic in geometry. Additionally, the presentation here is actually really good. The menus all have this cool holographic screen look to them, and when you load into maps, you get this fun zoom-in sequence on the planet that you're playing on. The music is also fantastic, which, I mean, is kind of to be expected since the soundtrack is almost entirely music just directly pulled from the movies. As far as the sound design goes though, this game holds up pretty well. There's sounds of ships, gunfire, and even more ominous noises like Darth Vader's breathing when he's on your side. When you're in a battle, you can hear someone over the radio pretty much at all times, and they're always giving you updates. Depending on your faction, the voice changes too. I did want to point out though, every character of your faction in this game has a nearly identical voice, and at least for the Rebels, the women even have the same voice as the men, just pitched up for some reason. The game has single player modes, a local split screen multiplayer option, and an online multiplayer mode. The single player modes are Historical Campaign, Galactic Conquest, and Instant Action. Historical Campaign is a series of missions with story interwoven. And by story, I mean actual footage from the movies. I can't show that here for obvious reasons, but yeah. The missions themselves actually take place on standard maps and don't really go outside of what you can do in the more straightforward modes, but it is a little bit more fun to have some context and framing for these missions. Plus, the actual enemies are sometimes changed too, like on Naboo, all you fight are the Gungans, or in the Plaza, it's just palace guards. Also, beating missions in historical campaign unlocks something called special features. These are basically just stills and concept art from the movies, and while it's not doing anything too crazy, I really like a good gallery mode. Galactic Conquest is a really fun mode, albeit a bit primitive, at least compared to the next game. In this mode, the whole goal is to take over the whole galaxy on your chosen map. The faction that you play depends on which map that you choose, and once you've chosen a map, you can then choose almost any planet to attack. Every planet has some kind of bonus or modifier that you can unlock for conquering it too. For example, if you conquer Tatooine in the first campaign, you get Darth Vader as an ally on your team. Then, after you've unlocked the bonus, like Darth Vader, and you choose the planet you want to attack next, you can then choose the planetary bonus. Other bonuses, though, include stuff like Sabotage, which damages enemy vehicles when they spawn. If you've chosen either the Empire or the CIS, you can actually choose to destroy an entire planet after a few victories. This mode is fairly basic and straightforward in this game, but it definitely gets expanded later on. I already covered instant action at the beginning, so what's left here are the multiplayer modes. The PlayStation 2 has the capability for online play, and you can create online games, but unfortunately I couldn't get it working properly. It does look like it works like a standard offline game, including AI troops on both teams though. Split screen multiplayer includes all of the standard modes, but with split screen support for up to 2 players. As a little side note, I remember as a kid playing split screen mode with friends, and it would almost always devolve into us trying to kill as many of our teammates as possible to end the games as quickly as possible. I have no idea why we found that so fun, but playing this game reminded me of that, and honestly it's kind of hilarious and a testament to how good these games are. Even playing them entirely wrong is still fun. Overall though, nowadays I'd say that Battlefront is still a good experience. There's a great solid foundation for the future of the series here, and when you're playing this game, the battles feel like Star Wars. I don't really know how to explain it. Maybe it's just nostalgia, or maybe it's just an indicator of how good Battlefront is. Star Wars Battlefront 2 was released in 2005 for PC, home consoles, and the PlayStation Portable. So I'm playing Battlefront 2 on PC, so it might be a bit of an unfair comparison, but this game to me looks a lot better than Battlefront 1. The models look cleaner, the textures are better resolution, but even just outside of the better visuals from what is probably higher graphics settings, the actual visual identity is significantly better. The maps all have these extra details now, like Felucia with all its vegetation. Gameplay-wise, there's a ton of changes. The biggest one is the rework of the unit selection. Now, instead of being able to select any unit at any time, you can only select from the base units, with the more powerful units being locked behind a points requirement. You can earn these points just by getting kills and capturing objectives. Once you've earned enough, you unlock the ability to use these more powerful units. Another huge change is the addition of playable hero units. These are a mixture of Jedi, Sith, and other important characters from the franchise. There's characters like Count Dooku, Darth Maul, Mace Windu, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Leia, Chewbacca, and more. These hero units all have unique voice acting and flavor dialogue that plays both when they join the battlefield, when they leave the battlefield, and at random times during gameplay. These units are unlocked in different ways depending on the mode that you're playing or the settings that you have enabled. But once you've unlocked them in a match, you can select them and use them until their lightsaber meter runs out. This meter, which acts both as a health meter and a timer of sorts, automatically depletes, but it can be refilled by defeating enemies. These hero characters also have special abilities or more powerful weapons than the standard units. For example, the lightsaber wielding characters have their lightsaber, force jumps, force speed, and 1 or 2 force abilities like force choke or a lightsaber throw. Another big gameplay change is the addition of full-on space battles. These aren't just flying around ships in space though. In space battles, you spawn in your capital ship and then you're able to hop into a fighter and fly through space, dogfighting other ships. But that's not all. You can also board enemy ships and infiltrate them or even sabotage their systems to get an easy win. The added element of gameplay is a huge amount of fun, and it's what I spent most of my time doing in this game as a kid. There's nothing like hopping into a starfighter and beelining all the way to an enemy ship, then attempting to covertly break into the engine room and plant explosives. You can even disable the ship's outer defense system if you want. Go wild! Another big change is the presentation. While I'd argue that the menu transitions missing are a pretty big downgrade, pretty much everything else was an upgrade. In battles, you can hear way more flavor lines from the characters, like hearing the clones get a kill and then shout out stuff stuff like,
just like the simulation.
This game has an actual full single-player campaign that focuses on the clones' 501st Legion. In fact, the story actually takes place during Episode 3 and onward, and it crosses over with the events of the movies a lot. The story unfolds with cutscenes that are actually original and not just ripped from the movies, but they are mostly just using in-game footage and images though. The actual missions are similar to standard command post gameplay, but with added objectives. Some of the objectives include destroying shield generators, getting an important item from one place to another, or exterminating the Jedi. The progression also includes space battles, and what I find interesting about them is the ability to just outright skip them. Maybe someone on the dev team thought that people might not like the space battles? Either way, it's really interesting to see that you can just bypass them entirely. I personally didn't, because I really enjoy the space battles. What I find most interesting about this campaign mode is the narration you hear during the scenes. It's a clearly conflicted unit of clones who know that they're going to turn on the Jedi, but they have to maintain this facade of order in order to stay loyal to Palpatine. The story is kind of broken into two halves. You play until the end of Order 66, which then transitions the story into kind of original trilogy territory. I think using the 501st Legion's perspective was a super cool idea and definitely perfect for covering all the big story beats in a unique way, especially because the story has you flipping from being good guys to being bad guys. I mean, you help Obi-Wan Kenobi defeat General Grievous, only to turn around and help exterminate the Jedi. Then you're helping the Empire wipe out the remaining Jedi, both with movie stuff and stuff that seems to happen off-screen. Sure, it's probably not all canon anymore after Disney reset the canon, but it's still really cool and a great storytelling device. Moving on from the fantastic campaign, Galactic Conquest returns in this game, but it works a little bit differently now. Rather than just selecting the planet you go to, you almost have a strategy-like game board interface where you move your capital ship around. You can move your ships once per turn. Some spaces are just empty spaces for movement, while others have planets that you can play on and conquer them. Winning the battle and conquering the planet gets you a credits bonus. You can use these credits to buy the bonuses like the health regeneration, access to hero units, and even stuff like auto turrets at allied command posts. Interestingly, you can also use these credits to buy units themselves, since you only start out with the base unit available in matches. You can buy up to 3 bonuses at a time, but you can only use 1 during your matches. Using a bonus depletes that bonus and you have to buy it again. If your ship and another ship occupy the same space, you have a space battle where you can take out the enemy ship. This mode is a lot of fun in this game and adds a whole new layer of depth to an already fun mode from the previous game. I wouldn't say the strategy element is intense, but it does make a difference and makes it a little bit more fun to play. Something I want to talk about are the new modes in this game. You can easily find them all in instant action, and I want to focus on 2 of them. The first is Hunt mode. This one is self-explanatory, I would hope. In this mode, the goal is to hunt as many of the creatures on your chosen planet as possible. On Endor, for example, you're hunting Ewoks as the Empire. Of course, you can also play as the creatures being hunted and really turn the tables. It's actually hilarious watching the Ewoks throw spears and then get said spears replenished with a resupply droid. The other mode is XL mode. This right here is my absolute favorite mode in this game, hands down. This mode was only available on PC, I believe, but oh boy, I bet you can guess why once you see this gameplay. This mode puts a ton of units on the screen all at once to battle in an all-out war. This mode feels the most like a real grand-scale Star Wars battle, and it truly is the closest you could get at this point to feeling like you were in Star Wars, in my opinion. It's such a good mode, and you're bound to stumble upon something cool or memorable happening just playing it offline with bots. The only real downside to XL mode is that it was only available on some maps, but it makes sense since it's only available on the maps that have wide open battlefields. Multiplayer returns in this game, and since I'm playing on PC, there's actually servers available. While this hasn't always been the case thanks to some GameSpy shenanigans, it's awesome to see that the game is still thriving. The actual multiplayer gameplay is very similar to single player, including the standard command point conquest maps and capture the flag. Though I did want to point out that the meta here seems to be rolling and explosives. The entire time I played online, all everyone did was roll around as much as possible and drop explosives everywhere. While this isn't necessarily what I imagine when I think of a grand Star Wars battle, it is hilarious to watch it unfold, and it was a ton of fun online. Unfortunately, there was a little bit of cheating going on, but otherwise it was still a great experience. While I won't be covering them in this video, there are a bunch of mods out there that add new maps, units, modes, and more. There's also graphics overhauls and that kind of stuff too. It's really extended the life of this game, which says a lot since it came out in 2005. Overall, Battlefront 2 is an incredible game, and really, there's nothing like it. There are newer games with the same name, but they're different. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Star Wars Battlefront 2 also got a release on the PlayStation Portable. This version shares a lot with the standard version, but has some notable differences. For starters, the controls are reworked and there's a few control schemes that you can choose from. The default is a control scheme that uses the left stick for movement and the face buttons for looking around. A bunch of PSP shooters actually used to use this kind of control style, and once you get used to it, it actually works pretty well. Another big difference here is that this game has a pretty obvious visual downgrade. Textures are a bit muddier and the view distance is significantly lower, but it honestly still looks pretty good for what it is. The biggest downgrade for me though is the lack of both narration and unit voices. Normally, like I've mentioned earlier, there's a narrator giving you updates about the battle, such as command posts being captured and hero units joining the battle. Instead, this version opts for just on-screen text cues. The unit voices are also now few and far between, but in my experience, they're mostly silent unless they're dying. The voice acting for hero units is also gone entirely, and the ambient dialogue is instead just grunting noises at best. I totally understand why this is, but it's still kind of a bummer. The final big downgrade is the noticeable reduction in maps. There's a bunch of maps that are just missing outright, including Coruscant, Volusia, and Tatooine. The space maps also seem changed in that you can still land on enemy ships, but the engine and control rooms are completely missing. That all being said, the gameplay here is still 100% intact outside of the things that I mentioned. On foot and space battles honestly feel almost exactly the same as they did on the primary version of the game, just with slightly different controls. The game does hold your hand a little bit more with the aiming, but all that does is stop it from feeling frustrating. The game features single player and ad hoc PSP to PSP multiplayer. While I won't be talking about the multiplayer in the PSP version, it worked using a wireless connection between two PSPs in close proximity. The single player modes are Challenges, Galactic Conquest, and Instant Action. Challenges are a unique mode to this version of the game, and there's 3 sets of challenges available. The first is a series of hunt-like challenges where you're given a time limit to hunt down a specific number of the species that it wants you to hunt. The second is a series of challenges that are similar to the hunt, but instead you're taking out a certain number of officers, who are slightly stronger infantry units. Finally, there's a set of challenges where you're basically just playing capture the flag with some machine parts. This challenge mode isn't the most in-depth, but it definitely is a neat little feature that sets this game apart from the main console and PC version. I like how there's little mission notes in the loading screens that give context as to why you're doing these missions, and really, they're just fun little time wasters. The remaining modes, Galactic Conquest and Instant Action, function identically to how they did in the standard version of Battlefront 2. Honestly, Battlefront 2 on the PSP is impressive to me because it really is just a scaled down version of the normal game. It's clear that this is an actual port that they put effort into rather than just a secondary version that plays completely differently from the primary version. Now, of course, they had to make some sacrifices, but the fact that they were able to cram so much into this version of this game is super admirable to me. I bet no one expected this one. Star Wars Battlefront 3 was in development by Free Radical Design, a development studio that was mostly known for the Time Splitters games. Free Radical got quite a ways into development too, but unfortunately for a variety of reasons, the game was never finished. Fortunately for us, an alpha build of the game eventually found its way online, and well, here it is. So keep in mind, this game was completely unfinished, and who knows how old this build actually is compared to what the developers were working on. Additionally, Xbox 360 emulation is very rough, so some of the issues that I run into here could be because of the game, because of the emulator, or a mixture of the two. I did download a couple of mods that are supposed to fix some of the bigger issues, but these are still very early and work in progress mods. The people who made these mods are actually a super dedicated part of the Battlefront community called Free Radical Archive, and you can find a lot of this stuff on their Discord server. I'll link to their website in the description though. Again, this doesn't fix everything, not even close to it, but it does make this a bit more playable. That being said, there's some really interesting things to look at here. For starters, we can see all of the menus, and they're really polished actually. There's menus for single player, multiplayer, an extras menu, and more. The single player modes include a campaign, training mode, galactic conquest, instant action, challenges, free play, and Jedi Arena. So the gameplay here is pretty rough, but this game was actually going to do some groundbreaking stuff in my opinion. The biggest thing, seamless surface to space battles. You could take any ship and fly right into space and dock in a Star Destroyer. You could then get out of the Star Destroyer and fly right back down to the surface. That is super cool, and it pains me that this isn't something that you can do in the newer games. Clearly they had it working here, at least for the most part, but I'm shocked it's not something that's made it into a mainline game, at least not at this point. The actual ground gameplay is super reminiscent of the first two games. You pick a unit and you make your way to the command points, defeating any enemies that you see. While the enemy AI was fairly broken, some would still shoot at me. The controls are standard shooter controls, but the left bumper is a dedicated roll control button. Boarding turrets and vehicles is mapped to Y, and jumping is mapped to A. Interestingly, if you jump and it's a far enough jump, your character will actually do a roll to soften the landing. Space and aerial combat are also here and work pretty similarly to how we've seen in the past, though you can now lock onto the ship that you're fighting and aim only at it. I noticed that they really liked just ramming me, and that's how I died pretty much every time in space. That being said, the space combat seems almost finished in my opinion. At least the foundation here is probably the least glitchy thing that I encountered. I tried the hero characters and they seem to be in the most rough shape. They don't really have any AI if they use a lightsaber, and using them also feels kind of weird. You can kind of just swing wildly or hold down the left trigger to lock onto someone and use different moves by flicking the right stick. It's super rough and not very fun or easy to use, but I can't really criticize it given that this is an unfinished game. There's an entire hero versus hero mode, but it's, yeah. Guess what though? There's a campaign! And it's actually accessible to an extent. This campaign has a bunch of missions, and there were actually voiced cutscenes built into the game already. While my version was glitchy and missing the voices, you can actually find these cutscenes with the voice acting intact online. I also ran around some of the mission areas, and they're pretty detailed. It looks like the missions would have worked similarly to how they did in Battlefront 2's campaign, but with a dedicated character completing the objectives rather than generic units from the faction that you're playing. It was clearly going to be a more personal story with a cast of characters original to this story, though I'm sure we would have seen a bunch of the more well-known Star Wars cast make an appearance too. It's interesting looking at just how fleshed out these maps are. They're not just reused from the other modes, these are specific to this campaign maps. They're shockingly detailed and have a pretty high amount of explorability. It looks like there's standard objectives for the missions and bonus side objectives that I imagine would have been optional. The AI here is still pretty broken, and trying to complete missions crashed my game. But you can see that they were pretty well into developing this campaign, and I'm sad we never got to see what it would eventually turn into. There's another mode called Challenges, and while I don't think these were fully implemented, they still look like they could have been super cool. There's one called the Kessel Run, R2 versus the Buzz Droids, and even one just called AT-AT Fall Down. While we may never know exactly what all of these entailed, it's still fun to theorize based on the names and the maps alone. I tried to launch Galactic Conquest a few times, but unfortunately it just crashed my emulator instantly. I do wonder what kind of changes they would have made to the formula here, because Battlefront 2's Galactic Conquest was fantastic and it worked super well. Of course, there are multiplayer modes that you'd find in games of this era, including online play, split screen, and system link. While I couldn't try these modes, and honestly would be shocked if they worked well, you can probably imagine how they would have worked, and it was most likely similar to how the modes worked in previous games. I really wish this game was able to be completed. There's so much potential here, and it's crazy how far it got into development only to be completely cancelled. It actually reached pretty much mythic status for the longest time because everyone knew it existed, but no one had really seen anything from it besides some bits and pieces of promotional footage. There were also a couple of other games that were made to be pseudo Battlefront 2 successors, but they too never really materialized. The most that we have is this work in progress version of Battlefront 3. Hopefully modders can someday swoop in and turn this into a fully playable experience though. What they've done so far is pretty impressive, and there seems to be a pretty good community working on it still. And that's it for part 1. I originally didn't plan to include Battlefront 3, but fortunately I found out how to make it work at the last second. Keep an eye out for the next part where I go into some of the lesser known Battlefront games, and then later on, of course. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait for you to see the next part. I'm hard at work on it, and it should be out really soon. And if you like this video and want to see more, definitely consider subscribing. I make this stuff all the time, and I'm always working on more. Thank you so much, and as always, have a fantastic day.